Welcome to Football Never Sleeps, the aspiring to be viral, perfectly caffeinated, moan-on bell ringing, college football playoff caliber weekly YouTube show all about Notre Dame football and the PTSD that comes with it. I'm Eric Hansen, still in my TV clothes. He's Tyler James. I don't know what he's wearing. Ahead tonight, we'll update you on the latest injury availability front with some news about standout nose guard Howard Cross III and Notre Dame's kickers by committee. Army and Notre Dame meet for the 52nd time on Saturday night, but the first time both are ranked in this matchup since 1958. We'll break down why the Cadets come in the Yankee Stadium clash unbeaten and ranked. Speaking of rankings, the college football playoff update is coming tomorrow night. We'll break that down, what we think will happen. Of course, we have recruiting drama, your questions, but no fake punts. This is
All right.
You may want to tell them after the promo here what the moan-on bell is.
Oh, come on. Who doesn't know what the moan-on bell is? All right. Anyways, Football Never Sleeps is presented by MyBookie. The Chicago Bears, believe it or not, found another way to break my heart on Sunday, but at least they were able to cover the spread against the rival Green Bay Packers. That's just another way that MyBookie is helping me through this rough NFL season. MyBookie is the one book that has your back. There's no fluff, no second guessing, just straight up action with the decisions in your hands as you're looking for an edge. Maybe you have your eyes on a road underdog, you really like the under on a game total, or you want to bet against those Bears. MyBookie has what you need to make a good wager, and MyBookie has hooked us up with a deal for our Football Never Sleeps viewers. Sign up with promo code INDS to double your first deposit of up to $1,000 with a 100% deposit bonus. You can click the link in our video description below and make sure you use code INDS to take advantage of this incredible deal. Bet anything, anytime, from anywhere with MyBookie, the sports book that gives you control. All right. Shout out to Brian Habermail saying Eric's lighting is better tonight. I would agree with you, Brian. Before we get rolling further with the show, make sure you're subscribed to us here on the YouTube channel, which is free. That allows you to get in questions and comments during the show. And then make sure that allows you to keep track of all the content that comes out on our YouTube channel throughout the week. You can also sign up for a 30-day free trial to InsideNDSports.com with the promo code NDYT. That gets you access to our premium analysis and recruiting coverage and special access to us over on the Insider Lounge, which is where we spend a lot of our time. Our community shares all their opinions, and we drop our inside information there first. Appreciate everyone being here tonight. We want to hear from you in the comments, even if you're watching us on replay too, so please don't be shy. All right, and let's have a good show. Eric, first, I wanted to start with Notre Dame's injury report because there were some updates and non-updates and some discussions today as it relates to the health of some of Notre Dame's players. First, and probably most importantly, Notre Dame may be without starting nose tackle Howard Cross III again this week as he remains questionable with an ankle injury. Do you feel better about Cross's absence given the play without him the last couple of weeks?
Yes and no. I mean, Howard Cross, when Notre Dame played Navy on October 26th, was Notre Dame's highest-rated defender by Pro Football Focus in that particular game, and he's been pretty good against triple option football his whole career. He played 38 out of the 50 snaps, defensive snaps in that game, and yet Army and Navy aren't mirror images of each other from an offensive standpoint. There's enough nuance difference between them. The good news is this: the two guys that will be taking a lot of his snaps, Donovan Heinisch and Gabe Rubio, were also very good against Navy. Rubio was the number 2 rated defender. He played 25 snaps in that game. Donovan Heinisch played 12, was the 5th rated defender, and he played pretty well against Virginia. He had 39 snaps, which was a career high for him. So we know we can handle the volume. So from that standpoint, I think it's good news. From the standpoint, Howard Cross is probably not going to play, I'm guessing. Is not great news, but again, the guys that would replace him have done pretty well against triple option concepts.
Yeah, Marcus Freeman has tipped his hand a little bit at times when he thinks the guy will play, even though they're listed as questionable.
Yeah.
And he did not do that today. Now he could also be trying to keep that reserve too, and maybe get Army to hope that Howard Cross isn't playing against Army. But it doesn't sound promising at this point. But we'll see how that develops going into the game by the time we get to Saturday. But I have been impressed with the guys that have stepped up, which seems to be like a common refrain, especially on defense with Notre Dame. Seemingly whoever Notre Dame puts out there in a gold helmet on defense seems to step up and do what's asked of them. And Donovan Heinisch and Gabriel Rubio have done a good job of that. And they are, because they are more veteran players and have been around Notre Dame for multiple seasons, they do have some more experience playing against the option. And so that should be something that Notre Dame would tap into without Howard Cross.
Riley Mills has upped his snaps, or
Yeah.
I guess I should say Al Washington has upped Riley Mills snaps, and he's handled that pretty well. You get past those three, and then you kind of get into Armel Mucum, Sean Sevillano territory, and that's a little bit more precarious, but so far they've been able to handle it pretty well.
Yeah, and at least with those guys, you would think, like, I think pass rushing is more difficult from an interior lineman perspective at times for younger players. Whereas, like, hey, if you just got to hold a block and make sure that the guy that's blocking you doesn't block someone else, then maybe that's a role that can be filled a little bit easier if necessary. But I think Notre Dame would certainly feel more confident with those more experienced guys out there. Kicker Mitch Jeter is expected to be available for Notre Dame despite not being used in the second half against Virginia. Freeman told us today that the staff decided to rest him because he's not quite full go. Do you think that Notre Dame can afford to not have Jeter available against Army?
I think it's precarious. And here's why. Since Jeter got hurt against Stanford, so that was October 12th, Notre Dame went into that game 5 for 7 on field goals this year. The two that they missed were both blocks against Northern Illinois, and one of those was from 62 yards. Since then, Notre Dame is 3 of 8 on field goals, and that's 1 of 2 from Jeter, 2 of 5 from Zach Yoakum, and 0 of 1 from Marcello Diamede. And so having a healthy Mitch Jeter, and a lot of those were not high leverage, high pressure kicks either. And so that's what's disconcerting there. They have been good on extra points. The field goal thing is a little sketchy, and they've had Eric Goins fill in the kickoff role, and he's pretty close to what Jeter would do in that in terms of distance and frequency of touchbacks. He's done a pretty good job. But that field goal thing in a tight game and a pressure game, I think resting him in the second half, if that helps him get closer to 100%, is better. One other thing Marcus Freeman said was in that game, they felt like the level of health that Mitch Jeter was in the Virginia game, he could go about 42 yards. That was the max. And that's why they had Marcello kick the 54-yarder. They're hoping to extend that distance this week.
Yeah, in addition to like all those concerns about the other guys, like you wonder how accurate Jeter can be. Like that one that he missed since he came back was pretty bad. And you wonder, is that related to his physical concerns? And I don't know, like what's the chance that he re-aggravates that, even if it's a 41-yarder versus a 43-yarder? And so it seems like they're kind of walking on eggshells to make sure that they can keep Mitch Jeter available. But it doesn't, like, I'm not convinced yet that the Mitch Jeter that will be available is one that will be as reliable as he was at the beginning of the season. So that I think is a concern moving forward. And I don't know what the route of that is. I think, especially when you're a kicker, like it's so much of repeated motions that if you have an issue, it's hard to get the right amount of practice in. It's hard to avoid that pain going away, I imagine. So it seems like Notre Dame's in a tricky situation there. I would imagine if there was a benefit to just completely shutting him down and keeping him out like they did in previous games, they would continue to do that. But they didn't do that against Virginia. And it doesn't sound like that's the plan against Army. So we'll see how this approach ends up working out for Notre Dame. But I think it is a little bit troubling, especially because you're probably going to play some closer games down the stretch than you have in the last month or so. All right, the last injury-related update was the fact that wide receiver Jayden Greathouse was not on this week's injury report, despite being sidelined against Virginia with an apparent upper body injury. So that seems to be good news for Notre Dame. Even if Greathouse is healthy, though, do you think Jayden Harrison should be given more snaps against Army? I think someone in the audience, Tyler Iams, wondered the same thing.
I like, tag teaming those two guys. They give you different skill sets. Harrison is a pure speed guy. Greathouse gives you that physicality where he's a tough matchup against smaller nickels and corners. So I'd like to see them split the reps, but Harrison has come on as of late. He got his first touchdown in a Notre Dame uniform, his 5th overall. Wasn't used a lot as a receiver at Marshall. He is being used more at Notre Dame as a receiver, and I like him as a receiver. So, I would like to see both those guys. I'm high on both of them. How about you, Tyler?
It just feels like the amount of plays that Jayden Harrison makes as it relates to the amount of plays that he's on the field is pretty high. Like it sort of reminds me of like a Jack Kaiser last year, where he's not necessarily playing a lot because you don't use your rover as much. But he was producing at a higher level than, say, like a Maris Leofau.
Right.
But there was just different situations that Notre Dame wanted Maris Leofau in the game versus Jack Kaiser. So I would be a proponent of finding ways to get Jayden Harrison involved. He has a burst that is obvious when he's running full speed and cutting and seeming to be giving opponents problems in covering him, and that can create some easier throws for Riley Leonard, even though arguably the touchdown that got called back was one of Riley Leonard's better throws of the game.
Yeah, that was a 77-yard pass play
to hit Jayden Harrison sort of in stride and make that one pretty easy for Jayden Harrison, who did the work in getting open as well. So it's like, if you asked me in August, would you be concerned if Jayden Greathouse is out, I would say yes. But right now it's not as concerning as I thought it would be, because of the way Jayden Harrison has stepped up. And honestly, Jayden Greathouse hasn't played as well as I expected this season. And so I think that's created even more of an opportunity for Jayden Harrison to rise up and play well. All right, before we get into some of the questions you all have submitted, I wanted to run through a quick scouting report on what we should know about Army, Notre Dame's opponent this Saturday in Yankee Stadium. Not only is Army undefeated and ranked number 18 by the Associated Press voters, but the Black Knights from West Point have a statistical profile that I think is pretty imposing. Army is ranked number 1 in rushing offense, number 1 in team passing efficiency, number 1 in red zone defense, number 2 in time of possession, number 2 in scoring defense, number 2 in third down and fourth down conversion rate, number 3 in rushing defense, number 5 in total defense, number 6 in turnover margin. Eric, you track these stats about opponents like weekly, and you update them pretty regularly. Is that about as good of a combination of stats that you can remember seeing from maybe not like a playoff level opponent that Notre Dame's going against?
Yeah, that's unusual to hit that many single digit rankings on both sides of the ball.
Right.
In so many different places. The one thing we should bring up is Army is 133rd in pass offense. So they don't throw it very often, but to be really good at it and not throw it very often is almost more dangerous, because you can get lulled to sleep by the infrequency of it, and then they're going to really ding you with it. I would say where I'm skeptical of some of the numbers are who Army has played. They played one team with a winning record that's an FBS team, and that's East Carolina, who's 6-4. I think I had the collective of the FBS teams was 28-57. So they played some bad teams, but they've also played, like, their rush defense number is third. They played Air Force, who's a triple option team. They played teams that are good running the ball. So not all these are mirages potentially because of the level of competition. They've been tested in some of these areas. So it's really going to be interesting to see how those hold up for Army. But the defense is where Army and Navy, the biggest difference. Again, you mentioned Army is 5th in total defense. Notre Dame is 6th. Navy is 81st. That's the difference between those two teams.
Yeah, I think the rush defense, which you asked Marcus Freeman about today, I think is an impressive statistic. To me, like, it doesn't really matter who you're playing against. If you have good rush defense numbers, I think that is a good statistic, and I think that's one of those stats that you always track, that the teams that are winning college football championships are typically good in that. The conversion,
they do it without a ton of sacks. Sometimes a lot of sacks will dilute that number. They're 50th in sacks, so it's not like it's skewed because of that.
The conversion rate, I think, is always, especially when you're playing against an option offense, they're probably, I imagine it lends to the fact that they're not facing a lot of 3rd and 20s or 3rd and 15s like Notre Dame was against Virginia on Saturday. But the fact that they're converting 3rd and 4th downs at high rates makes you, like, it's a 4-down offense. You have to be ready to defend. And that is something that Notre Dame will need to be prepared for. And then the turnover margin, I think, is important, because that was something that, although it was Navy's turnover margin was good going into the Notre Dame game as well, but that didn't play out that way. Notre Dame ended up getting a lot of turnovers forced against Navy, and that would be one way to really upset the way Army wants to play on Saturday, by forcing some turnovers. And then also, obviously, Notre Dame not turning the ball over and giving Army extra possessions, I think, would be important.
You got 2 1s versus 1s in this game. The leader in turnovers gained versus the leader in turnovers lost. And then you have the pass efficiency defense #1 team against the #1 team in pass efficiency.
Yeah, the pass efficiency defense versus pass efficiency, I don't think will be as big of a storyline because the amount of passes that Army will probably throw. Yeah, that is.
But if they get behind, they may have to throw more.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
Because they have only been behind, I think, in one game, and that was the North Texas game. That's the only time they've trailed in any game this year.
Right. The categories that, like, I think are sort of like givens for Army, a rushing offense, because they run the ball so much. Like, that's like Army when it's decent, or Navy for that matter, when they're good to above, or to above average to good, they're going to still be towards the top of college football and rushing offense, just because of the priority they place on it. And I think
they are 3rd in yards per carry.
Correct. And I think total defense, I think that can get skewed too, because of the way you have time of possession. Now, obviously that matters. Like on Saturday, like, Notre Dame's not going to be able to win the game by yards. You got to win by points, and you need to have the ball. So the time of possession really allows, I think, Armies to keep its defense off the field, and not expose it. And I certainly has not faced an offense like Notre Dame's that will challenge Army's defense in the way it's been challenged.
Well, let me ask you this. Given all that this is traditional triple option, play, keep away football, if you're Marcus Freeman and you win the toss, do you elect to receive instead of defer?
No, I would defer.
Okay.
I would put my defense out there, and because I think Notre Dame is in a better position if it can get the ball, even with 1 minute left in the first half, and then get the ball in the second half. There's a bigger chance for, like, a momentum shift for Notre Dame than it would be for Army, for instance. Like if you give the ball to Army with 1 minute left and then they get the ball after half, like I don't think Army's going to score that fast before the first half ends. So I like putting my defense out there and testing them, because I don't think like trailing 7-0 is going to make Notre Dame's offense feel like, oh crap, what are we going to do? So I would be in favor of deferring if Notre Dame won the toss. All right, let's jump into some of these questions the folks have been submitting. Jeff Stevens says, this Saturday, do you expect Snead to get the extra snaps like he did versus Navy? And Rubio, why did he get one less snap versus Virginia than walk-on Grant Ristoff?
I do expect Snead to get some play in the Navy game or in the Army game, because he has done pretty well against triple option concepts, both in the Navy game this year and in the Navy game last year. He played really well, and he's been playing well with a more narrowed focus. So yes, I do expect him. I think the reason Rubio got fewer snaps was because Donovan Heinisch played so much that they were using Rubio to back up Mills more than they were Heinisch, although he could slide back and forth. And then the game got out of hand and it was 35-0, and they wanted to get some backups in the game. And so I think Ristoff got 16, and there were some other defensive linemen that don't play a lot that got double-digit snaps, and some defensive backs too. I know Luke Talich got 16 again. The two freshman corners both got 16 snaps. So that group was on the field quite a bit at the end of the game. And
yeah,
that was an 80-yard, 16-play drive.
Right.
So they weren't going to take Ristoff off and plug Rubio back in, although they could have after Virginia called timeout with 22 seconds left.
Yeah, I don't know if Rubio played on that drive at all. I have not. I didn't track that, but
it was basically that group. It was a 16-play drive at the end of the game.
Yeah, so I mean that explains the difference. There's no point in running Rubio out there, especially if you're going to need him against Navy or Army. I'm sorry, putting him out there, someone who's already had an injury this season, putting him out there in garbage time when you can get some other guys some time, makes sense. That Ristoff would outsnap him there. I would imagine Jaylen Snead will play an important role against Army. He's shown to be adept in playing against the option. And if he can play as well as he did against Navy, that's something that would be incredibly valuable to Notre Dame's defense.
I love his speed on the edge against them.
All right. Joshua Williams says, do either of you have a guess as to why Jayden Thomas's targets have become non-existent? He used to be a top target with other quarterbacks.
It's related to how much Bo Collins is on the field. Bo Collins is by far the wide receiver with the most snaps this season. I think in all but 3 games, he's had the most in every game. So 7 out of the 10 games, he's had the most. And I mean, it's considerably more than anybody, not just the boundary receivers. So there's just fewer opportunities for Jayden Thomas. It's a shame because I think he's a great teammate. He's been really reliable when he's been healthy in the past. But I think this coaching staff just feels like Bo Collins is a better option. Now, he's not been particularly productive the past couple of weeks, but that's the direction they've decided to go.
Yeah, I think it's mostly due to the Bo Collins effect. Like, Bo Collins does not leave the field that much. And even some of it's been more later in the game lately, but when they bring in a bigger package, they've been using Deion Colsey some in like red zone situations and short yardage situations. And that was a role that Jayden Thomas often used. So I don't know if that's just because it's later in the game and they want to get Deion Colsey some run, or what is going into that decision. But that is another role that Jayden Thomas has played in the past, but we haven't seen him as much lately. Bo Collins has not been as reliable in recent weeks as he has been earlier in the season. So if there's a time to maybe try to give Jayden Thomas some snaps, I think we're getting close to that in terms of trying to maybe take some of the load off of Bo Collins. All right. Scott Fegan says, are you concerned about the continuing scoring gaps by the offense? I think I heard we were at 1 of 11 on third down. There were lots of penalties and early drop passes.
The third down thing was concerning on its face. I think it was 1 of 12. But then, I asked Marcus, I think, about that in the post game, and he brought up a good point about it was third and forever a bunch of those times, and you're not going to convert a lot of those. But there were some convertible third downs that they didn't cash in. The penalties played into those long third downs and the drop passes. So yeah, I think those were concerning. And yet, Notre Dame is, let's see, scoring offense. They're 11th in the country. So they got that going for them. But yeah, you want to get incrementally better every week. And those are some of the things. I mean, there were too many 3 and outs, and there definitely points in that game where you just felt like if the defense hadn't got the fire started, how effective would the offense have been? So I do think, Scott, there's right to, throw a Nerf ball at the TV or whatever, but be a little bit frustrated. But I do think, there's room for improvement. And I think this offense is good enough to make that improvement. And they'll have to do it against a really good defense this weekend.
Yeah, the tenor of Saturday's game would have been a lot different if, like, say, after that fake punt, Virginia goes down the field and scores on offense rather than Virginia throws an interception. And then that sort of sets up Notre Dame to take advantage, and did so with 3 consecutive interceptions on drives late in the first half, although one didn't lead to a score.
But it led to a 54-yard field goal attempt.
Yes, right. So it's important defensively, but the offense, I think, does need to do a better job of playing fast from the start. The penalties are something that are Notre Dame does not play well enough offensively to overcome those types of penalties. The third and longs are not something that is comfortable for Notre Dame. They're not consistent enough in the passing game and or in pass protection to be able to overcome that. So I think that you gotta be sharp and make sure that you're not putting yourself in a hole, because Notre Dame's, while it does score a lot of points, I don't think it's an efficient enough offense or an explosive enough offense to be able to overcome that. And that's why you end up with a 1 for 13 on third downs and still score enough that it wasn't really that much in doubt against Virginia. All right, Brian Habermill says, I saw Love's 76-yard run, and it reminded me of Josh Adams' 98-yard run versus Wake Forest and Mike Elko years back. Are teams with 4.25 always as susceptible to C-gap or bounce out explosive runs?
I don't have enough data to tell you that, to be honest, Brian. You're way ahead of me on that. You come on our show and you answer that question, because it sounds like you've studied it. What I will say is, I looked at that play again, and there was really good blocking on the right side by Emil Wagner and Rocco Spindler. And a lot of it with Jeremiah Love is he doesn't need a lot of space. And once he gets out into the open, he can outrun people. Now, whether a 4-3 or, a more traditional look on defense would have been helpful for them filling that gap, I don't know. But Love just has, and he's strong enough to break a tackle or two. That's a big difference between Jeremiah this year, when he had 1 touchdown, and the guy that has a touchdown in every or more in every game this year. Is he strong enough to break a tackle, and then he still has that breakaway speed? Tyler, I'll let you get more technical than me.
Yeah, I can't say that I'm enough of a defensive savant to say that like 4-2-5 schemes are more susceptible to those runs. I mean, I don't think it matters what.
It's a hell of a memory, though, that he remembered that from Wake Forest.
I don't remember what scheme that. Or I don't know that scheme was as important to the run as the run fits that Virginia had. Sorry, my mind was blanking on which team Notre Dame played on Saturday. That play, from my memory, Notre Dame was sort of had more receivers to the left side. The run went to the right where they had one tight end, which was Cooper Flanagan, and Flanagan blocks his guy out. There's a corner. So Virginia had a corner out to that side of the football who basically is unblocked. Not basically, he was unblocked. He's thinking he has outside contain, and Love doesn't run out there. And so he basically is taken out of the play because Love's so fast that he can get through that off tackle run that cornerback can't even make a play on it. The safety to that side gets blocked by Emil Wagner, who comes off of his double team block with Rocco Spindler, and Jeremiah Love's just that fast that he gets through there, and you're stuck with guys at bad angles, and he's going to outrun those guys. So I think it was a good job of, like, one, execution with your blocks, but two, formationally, Notre Dame put itself in an advantage with how Virginia had to line up against Notre Dame's skill players to the left side of the formation as well. All right. Somewhat related. Why Jay Golden 44? Why don't we do more sweeps or outside runs with both Love and Price? Won't we have to come playoffs?
I think that they feel like when those guys have those quick hitters, they do better. It seems like Price especially gets stuck in those lateral runs, and I'm not sure that it's as effective. And remember the one play where Jeremiah Love went kind of backwards 10 yards or whatever,
right,
Tyler, and he just kept moving laterally. But boy, when they hit it quick, they're just so fast that if they're not caught at the line of scrimmage, they can outrun people. And I'm beginning to think Aeneas Williams might be in that category too. Not as fast as Love, but certainly a guy when he hits the hole quickly. So I'm not sure that I feel like Notre Dame has to do more of that. And I would imagine Mike Denbrock's smart enough that if he thinks they have to do that in the playoff, he will.
Yeah, I pulled up some data from PFF that I know they keep track of. Now I don't.
Well, good. I'm glad I stalled for that.
I don't know. Like, I'm not charting this, so I can't refute or back up this data, but I think they're pretty reliable as it comes to this. For instance, like Notre Dame with runs off the right edge or right end have 6 yards per attempt. Left end is 8.4, so those are good numbers. But left tackle 6.7, left guard 6.6, middle right 6.7, right guard 7.2. So there's not like a significant difference between Notre Dame's efficiency in running off the edge versus running off of a guard. I think especially when you have the speed, if you find the right hole, like, you can get players out of position fast. So can that be done against certain defensive looks that you feel like you can take advantage of? Yes, I would agree. Like, for instance, the one play that Jeremiah Love had that comes to mind against Purdue, where he sort of bounced out to the outside and it was like, oh, as soon as he turned that corner, he was gone. Like, those are situations that maybe you're going to.
Everybody does that against Purdue, Tyler.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Purdue's defense helps. And so, like, I think it just sort of depends on the looks you get. And Notre Dame does so much zone runs that the running backs are reading where they believe the holes are. And so it could be an inside zone to the left or a mid zone to the left. If they find a crease to the outside of the tackle versus to the inside of the guard, like, they're going to try to figure out what they believe is best to get the most yardage out of that play. And sometimes it can just come down to the decision those guys are making, like, in the middle of the play. Like, obviously they have reads that dictate where they're going, but sometimes that can end up.
And I wonder too if some of the outside runs that have the big numbers are Riley Leonard. It seems like I can remember him having more success on the perimeter.
Yeah, that makes sense too. Especially in like a zone read, he's going to keep it to the outside rather than like up the middle. Did Donovan Heidish grade out well? It sure looked like he did. I think you mentioned that previously, Eric.
He did. He's been in the 70s, which is a very good score, not an elite score, but a very good score. The last 3 weeks, he played a career high 39 snaps. So yeah, he's had 3 good weeks in a row.
All right. EJ Ricky says, Coach Freeman talked recently about night games being a double-edged sword because they diminished rest/recovery time. Is this something that could hurt Notre Dame with a night game in NYC followed by a trip to LA?
He was actually asked about that very specific thing today, and they've gone over it with their sports science team. They'll get in like 3 or 4 in the morning, and then they've modified their schedule on Sunday and Monday to accommodate for that. They catch a break in going out to the West Coast, and that there's not a lot of school this week. They have Thanksgiving break. So they'll be able to catch up starting Wednesday through Saturday. They'll have a different routine in terms of sleep and practice and so forth. We still don't know what time that game is going to be starting. Out at USC, it's either going to be 3:37 or 7:30. I know I haven't eliminated a whole bunch of options there. It's not going to be at noon, but 3:30.
And it won't be 10.
7, yeah, or 7:30. Yeah, it's not going to be Pac-12 after dark, even though there is no Pac-12. So they've really researched this, and I think they feel really good about what they've done with that. They're not just leaving it to chance.
Yeah, I do wonder, like what matters more, that Notre Dame does have some off time because of school, or like because Notre Dame's sort of modifying its practice schedule both on the front end and the back end of the week as a result of the NYC trip and then to Los Angeles. So I don't know. Here's the thing. We're only going to question it if Notre Dame loses, right? Like that's how this usually works, right? We're not going to question whether or not Notre Dame designed its practice schedule correctly going into the USC game, or if it was a hangover from the Army game if Notre Dame beats USC. But they obviously have been planning for this. This isn't something that's caught Notre Dame off guard. This has been in the schedule all season. I don't think it's ideal by any means, but I do think Notre Dame can make it work. And you hope that whatever changes to the practice schedule during the week don't make Notre Dame less sharp against USC.
I know I had questioned that before, and I had been critical of Jack Swarbrick when he did it at one point. I was going back and looking, and I thought it was a Shamrock Series game, and then they ended up having to go out to the West Coast. I don't know if it was the USC game or if it was a different game, and I was going to look that up, but Tyler didn't talk long enough.
Yeah, it was the sequence would have been the Yankee Stadium against Syracuse.
Now, did they play that in the afternoon or the evening, though?
That was an afternoon game. It was definitely not.
Because I was critical of it, and they made that one an afternoon game, but they had one where they had a night game before a trip to the West Coast, and Brian Kelly had talked about the challenge of that, and I was critical in a column because I heard from Mr. Swarbrick directly about my column, and yet they did change that one to a day game. And I do think that it would have made sense for this to be an afternoon game. I think it would have been smarter to do that. And your partner's NBC, maybe you could have had a night game at home sometime instead of the Shamrock Series being at night. But
yeah,
Tyler likes to ride the subways at night. So.
All right, Mike DeVoy asked, Riley's interception was pretty bad. He was staring at that spot the entire play before he threw it. Many other times it seemed like he was going through his progressions quickly and throwing to his alternate receivers much more effectively than in the past. Do you see it the same?
Mike, you probably looked at it a lot more times than I did. I thought it was a bad interception. I think he consistently gets better with his progressions as we've gone into the season. That was an occasion where he didn't do that. So that's his 4th interception, so he's not doing it a lot. But I think he's getting better, but he's not certainly perfect with that.
Yeah, I would agree. I have not done my full game review yet, so I don't have numbers that I can point to or opinions based off of film review that I could say this many times he looked at a different target or whatnot. But anecdotally, it seems like he has been doing a better job of that. But certainly that interception was not an example of that.
Yeah, he was really hot and cold in this game. He starts out 0 for 2. and then he goes 16 for 17. So he's 16 for 17 in one stretch. The times that it wasn't that stretch, he was 6 of 16. So he got cold after the stretch. He was cold to begin with. I think one of those he threw it into somebody's hand. But I still think I see a Riley Leonard that's better. And it's pretty interesting because right now, Sam Hartman was in the stadium, and I thought this was kind of interesting. I looked at Riley's completion percentage today, and it's actually higher than what Sam Hartman's was last year, which was a career high for Sam Hartman.
Yeah, I have not, like I said, I haven't done the full review. That the stat about Riley Leonard completing so many passes and during that stretch, I'm curious how many are like third down throws that are short of the sticks, which usually aren't the most challenging throws. So maybe he's getting like that streak was increased by Notre Dame for facing some third and longs where he's throwing for 6 yards and it's a completion, but it's not something that's really stressing the defense. So there are certainly holes to poke in Riley Leonard's performance, regardless of what his stat line was. But in the greater sense, I do think that Riley Leonard is improving as a passer and is getting more confidence with more receivers. And that is a good thing for Notre Dame and a bad thing for opposing defenses. Scott Fegan has asked, do you see Mitchell Evans getting more looks to keep the ball moving?
He got 7 targets on Saturday, which was the team high. And yes, I do think we will see Mitchell Evans be a factor in the last 2 regular season games and whatever the postseason looks like. I think Riley Leonard and Mitchell are getting their chemistry and confidence together. And I think Evans is probably going to be a mismatch in the Army game, or at least a difficult matchup for Army's pass defense, which is statistically pretty good. I could see Bo Collins also being somebody that's challenging to deal with for the Army defense. But yeah, Evans is definitely getting the looks.
Yeah, I think he is becoming a more important part of the offense as he's becoming more confident with his health and becoming a reliable guy for Riley Leonard. The touchdown that he scored on the sideline, he was just sort of waiting there and waiting. He was like waving, "Hey, Riley, I'm open," and then Riley eventually found him, and Mitchell Evans did the rest after he got the ball and made the dive into the end zone. So it's been a work in progress in terms of getting those two guys on the same page because of the missed time for both of them in the offseason. But I think Notre Dame's at least peaking in the right time as it relates to those two.
I was trying to see if there was a fight going on this week because we had one last week. Thank goodness I don't see one in the comments.
All right. Let's see. I think we'll get into the punt. Actually, no. I wanted to talk a little bit about the college football playoff picture first, and then we'll talk about the punt because everyone wants to talk about the punt. Eric,
yes,
the college football playoff picture seems to be getting pretty clear for Notre Dame. If Notre Dame wins out, how clear of a path is it for Notre Dame to host a playoff game? Do you think that it's pretty safe at this point? Are there any teams that could cause an issue for Notre Dame?
If Notre Dame wins out, I believe that they will host a playoff game.
Yeah.
So let's look at this pragmatically. They are 6th in both polls. And if they are 6th in the college football playoff, that means they would be the 8th seed. That's the lowest seed that can host a game. Why are they 8th? Because there's going to be 2 conference champs. Again, this is all predicated on Notre Dame winning out.
Right.
There will be 2 conference champs that are ranked below them. And so you have to add 2 to whatever their ranking is. Now, could they move up higher than that? Yeah, that's possible. If Indiana loses to Ohio State, especially if they lose decisively, they'll drop below Notre Dame. Penn State, Notre Dame could end up jumping Penn State if Penn State isn't impressive in its last 2 games against Minnesota and Maryland. And if Notre Dame is dominant against USC, that's a common opponent between Penn State and Notre Dame. But I think, again, if they win out, given the fact that they will have beaten a top 25 team that's undefeated and then beating USC on the road, who's been competitive in every game they've played, I think that's going to be enough. And it's also going to keep teams from behind them jumping them.
Right.
And there's not a lot of schedule strength for those teams other than conference championship games. And even then, there's only so many scenarios. You know, the Big Ten championship game isn't going to cause somebody to jump over Notre Dame. Maybe the SEC championship would, but then a team would be coming down. Let's say Texas A&M beats Texas and is in the SEC championship game and wins it. Well, then Texas is coming down and going below Notre Dame. So there's not a lot. There's only 3 top 25 games left that aren't conference championships. It's Indiana, Ohio State this weekend, Notre Dame and Army this weekend, and Texas A&M right after Thanksgiving. So it's not all the big, colossal rivalry games we're used to seeing with this conference expansion.
Yeah, I was trying to drum up some like disaster scenario.
Of course you were.
Disaster scenario for Notre Dame to not get in. It's just hard. Like some of the things that I was putting like, okay, how could you get teams to stay ahead of Notre Dame? It's like, well, let's pretend Indiana wins out and then plays in the Big Ten championship, but then loses to Oregon. But so then maybe Indiana stays ahead of Notre Dame in that scenario.
I would think so.
And then Penn State, maybe they still stay ahead of Notre Dame. Let's say Texas wins out, goes to the SEC championship and loses. So then maybe Texas stays ahead of Notre Dame, can go ahead of or I guess they would stay ahead because they would have been ahead, but maybe they're not.
Well, you said they lost in the SEC championship
No.
game.
Yeah, they lost, but they beat Texas A&M.
Right, but I think with 2 losses, they're behind Notre Dame. Now, the committee may not see that. They may say, hey, we need to reward them for being in a conference championship
I mean,
game.
I think especially in the SEC, I don't think an SEC championship game loss, if it's from 1 to 2 losses, I don't think that's going to be
What if they lost to Georgia twice?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, you could just say, well, that's a bad matchup for Texas. Like, Georgia's a better team than them, but that doesn't mean everyone else is a better team than Texas. So I'm just throwing out possibilities. The other thing would be like, maybe if Boise State is given the 4 seed over a 1-loss BYU Big 12 champion, then maybe BYU's ahead of Notre Dame. But I don't necessarily see these things happening. But I'm just throwing out possibilities.
That's not happening. You didn't watch the BYU Kansas game then.
Well, it's not worth. BYU Kansas isn't worse than Northern Illinois, in my opinion. So, I think that there could be an argument for that if it happened to play out that way.
They're
but I don't
too
have
far down. They're like 14th and 15th in the polls right now. What's going to lift them up? Beating who?
Winning the Big
Beating
10,
Colorado?
Yeah, and no one's done that in a while. So I think winning the Big 12 championship.
Who has Colorado lost to? They've lost to 2 unranked teams. There's no way. There's not enough octane. You're creating drama.
All right.
Get off my lawn, Tyler James.
All right. Well, that's what the College Football Playoff Committee wants by releasing rankings on a weekly basis is drama. So that's what I'm giving them. All right. Let's get to the fake punt fallout. Scott Fegan says, sitting in the stands, I think I heard the loudest boos I've ever heard at the game, especially after the fake punt. So Marcus Freeman continued to get questions about that today in terms of the illegal formation penalty that wiped out the successful fake punt. The point of contention, as I understand it, between Notre Dame and the officials is whether or not Notre Dame was in a kick formation. The officials deemed that Notre Dame wasn't, which led to Notre Dame not having the correct numbered players on the line of scrimmage, which seems, very ticky-tack and something that I don't know that a lot of people were aware of being a rule. Notre Dame believed it was in a kick formation because Kaiser didn't take a direct snap under center. Regardless of the interpretation, Eric, like I don't know that either of us are smart enough to know whether or not Notre Dame or the officials are right other than listening to the arguments. Is there anything that you think Notre Dame could have done better leading up to the play that maybe would have prevented this from happening?
Well, I think it was brought up in the questioning, and John Bryce of Football Scoop also had an article about this. There's other teams that have done something similar and not been flagged for it. and I believe Marcus Freeman ran this by officials in August because they knew they had this play in their back pocket and they were going to run it at some point, and they seemed to get at least a green light, if not a lime green light, going into the season. And so he was also asked, well, could you have shown this to them or talked to them about it before the game? And he said, that it's probably not a great idea to show them film of it or whatever on an iPad. So it sounds like it's been used before and used legally. It seems to me to be ticky-tack, but it all turned out well for Notre Dame. Otherwise, we'd still be talking about it more. And it didn't sound like Marcus had gotten a final word from the ACC officials.
Yeah,
usually Brian Kelly would share that if the ACC officials office said the officials were wrong, we'd hear about it.
Yeah, well, I wonder, I don't know that it would be the highest of priority for the ACC to get to a play that didn't determine the outcome of the game by Monday at noon when Marcus, or 12:30 when Marcus talks to us. Do you think the ACC should make a public statement about it at this point?
I think so. I do.
Yeah, I think it would be nice to get the public.
I think accountability counts for those people too.
Yeah, and if they believe Notre Dame is wrong, they can explain why they think that Notre Dame is wrong. The only thing I think, I understand that Notre Dame obviously felt like it was a legal kick formation. Otherwise, it probably would have, and I think probably still could have discussed it with the officials prior to the game. Like, hey, if we line up a guy 2 yards behind the long snapper on a punt, is that a legal kick formation still, or is that not?
And they'll say, well, are there enough? What are the numbers of the other players? Because we're going to be looking for that while they're lined up.
Well, no, it's the other way around. It's Jack Kaiser's position dictates whether or not the numbers have to be. It's not the numbers dictate whether Jack Kaiser. So as long the Kaiser thing is what dictates whether or not those guys had to be wearing certain numbers. And I think that's why, if you watch the play, they threw the flag late because they had.
So if Kaiser had a 60-some jersey on, he could have done that?
No. It's not Kaiser's jersey number. It's where he's lined up.
Okay.
And I haven't watched the plays that are being referenced that have been run elsewhere.
So they could have changed the jersey numbers of the other guys and done it. Okay. It would have been okay.
Yeah. If those guys were legal lineman numbers, then the play wouldn't have been an issue. And Notre Dame didn't put those guys in legal numbers because it didn't believe that it needed to have those guys in legal numbers. I mean, it'd be just as easy to run your offensive lineman out there on a punt. It's not or someone that wears an offensive line number. I mean, they run Tyler Buckner out there, and number 26 is the same number as their holder. So it's not like Notre Dame hasn't thought about jersey numbers before. I'm curious, all this controversy aside, how much this, all these fakes that Notre Dame is running have to be causing headaches for opposing special teams coordinators to be ready for all the different things that Notre Dame has thrown out there. And I would imagine probably weakens the ability for you to set up good punt returns because you're so worried about all these fake punts that Notre Dame has done.
Notre Dame's also been blocking punts and getting close on punts too.
Yeah. All right. Let's do some recruiting updates, Eric. I'll just sort of run through what's happened. Today, the news was 4-star running back Justin Thurman flipped his commitment from Notre Dame to Kansas.
Because he wanted to play BYU.
As we reported on InsideNDSports.com, this was not a surprise. Notre Dame was willing to move on from Justin Thurman in the same way it did with Daniel Anderson. That's why Daniel Anderson left the class last month and why Thurman flipped to Kansas today. Notre Dame has sort of reevaluated its running back commitments this fall and didn't necessarily see the development that it had hoped to. Notre Dame took early commitments at the running back positions in that class, and that certainly did not work out for Notre Dame. Both Anderson and Thurman committed before October of their junior years, so Notre Dame is beyond that for the 2026 class and doesn't have a commitment there. So we'll see if the running back commitments hold whenever they come in the 2026 class. Thurman has 529 rushing yards in 9 games as a senior at Tampa Jesuit. And my understanding is that Notre Dame was supportive in trying to help him find a new home. And Notre Dame, without those two guys, just has one running back, 3-star running back, Nolan James from DePaul Catholic, who flipped from Boston College last week following a visit. I think that'll be Notre Dame's only running back in the class, but maybe that changes. There's been a lot going on at that position here in the last month or so. So we'll see. But I think Notre Dame will be content with just signing one running back in the class because it has a pretty good running back depth chart currently and should be able to keep those guys as happy as possible. The other thing that happened today is offensive tackle commit Will Black was upgraded to a 5-star recruit by Rivals. I think this isn't terribly surprising, but it's been a long journey for Will Black in terms of his standing as a prospect since Notre Dame took his commitment last December. He was a 3-star recruit back then. He moved up to a 4-star recruit in February. He moved into the Rivals 100 in May, and now he's up to number 19 overall in the 2025 class. So our Rivals analysts have been impressed by his development, his continued ability to show improvement, even against some weaker competition. And so now Notre Dame's in a position, as long as Will Black signs, which I expect him to do, and as long as he stays in that 5-star rating, which there will probably be, I think, a couple more updates before things get done going into next year, because I think they usually update them at some point in December, although maybe that doesn't happen and they just wait till after the All-Star games in January. So they should be able to sign both Will Black in this class and then last class, Kingston Viliamu-Asu was a 5-star recruit. So back-to-back classes with 5-star recruits would be an accomplishment for Notre Dame. Before Viliamu-Asu, the last 5-star recruit to sign with Notre Dame was Blake Fisher in the 2021 class. Now that's just based off of Rivals ratings that other sites have given Notre Dame signees 5-star ratings, but those are the Rivals things. I looked it up. I don't know if you saw this. I added it to the end of my story at some point this afternoon. Notre Dame has signed 20 5-star recruits since Rivals first started rating prospects back in 2002. Eric, do you have a guess of how many of those have been offensive linemen?
Yeah, I do have a guess because I keep a list and I won't sneak and look at it. I'm going to say Quentin Nelson, Sam Young, maybe those two. Just those two?
And Blake Fisher, who I mentioned.
Blake Fisher.
So, yeah it's 3, which I think is lower than I would have thought without like having thought about who those 5-star guys would be. You would think like offensive line would be a bigger chunk of the 5-star recruits for Notre Dame, given the success that Notre Dame has on the offensive line.
There's certainly guys that turned into 5 stars.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. Exactly. Joe Alt being a 3-star does not reflect how he.
Ronnie Stanley was about 176. He was a 4-star. McGlinchey wasn't even top 250. He was a 4-star. Zach Martin wasn't top 250. I mean, those are all 5-star college players.
All right. Couple things here. Bob Oxnard, will the team lick the Army in Yankee Stadium by using the forward pass? Yes, a question that could have been asked a century ago. Great show and great to meet you guys.
Great to meet you too, and the rest of the family. Bob brought his dog to lunch with us, and we had to be sneaky about having the dog at the restaurant outside and where we sat. So that was a lot of fun sneaking around.
He also brought his wonderful wife too. Don't give all.
She was what I said. The whole family. Well, we didn't have to sneak the wife in.
Well, yeah, but the fact that you mentioned the dog specifically before the wife, I thought was funny. So
she was awesome, and the food was really good, and the company was really good. So if you want to take us out to lunch, we'll be game for that. And I see the lick thing. I think referred to the dog, wouldn't it have? I'm hoping it wasn't a reference to you, Tyler.
I don't know if that's the Grantland Rice lingo or not. They always use different strange phraseology, I would say, back then that you wouldn't find in common sports lingo. Speaking of Yankee Stadium, Jeff Stevens says, I think Eric had a past situation at Yankee Stadium that involved food poisoning and vomiting. Can you tell that story again for old time's sake?
I actually got food poisoning before I went to Yankee Stadium, and so I was sick on the trip there. And yes, it involved vomiting and felt awful until the day of the game. I started feeling more myself. And there's this guy named John Finneran that used to work with us at the South Bend Tribune, and he was in New Jersey and said, "Hey, can I go to the game? Can you get me a credential? I'll help you guys, this and that." So he decided, I go, "I'm starting to feel a little bit better." He goes, "Let me go get you some hot chocolate," because it's an open air stadium. So he goes and gets me a hot chocolate. He trips and spills the hot chocolate all the way down my back. So that was kind of the happy ending to that story, I guess. And what else happened that day? Brian Van Gorder got hired as defensive coordinator that night. So that just completed the trifecta: food poisoning, hot chocolate on the back, and Brian Van Gorder coming into my life.
Well, I will be packing my jacket this weekend for the open air press box in Yankee Stadium. I don't have any horror stories from my last trip there, and hopefully this goes well as well.
Well, I've got a horror story for you, Tyler.
Oh boy.
Because we were talking about Colorado. If they get to the Big 12 championship, how many ranked teams will they have beaten?
How many ranked teams will they have beaten? Is it 0?
It's a big fat 0. That what's left on their schedule is 4-6 Kansas, the Kansas team that would annihilate Northern Illinois, and 4-7 Oklahoma State, which hasn't won a Big 12 game yet. And their losses are to Kansas State and by 18 points to Nebraska. That's their schedule.
Hey, that's a Nebraska team that almost beat Ohio State.
And almost beat Indiana by negative 49 points.
I'm just glad I'm not on the playoff committee because I think I'd probably go insane at all the different conversations that come up with this. I know it's Football Never Sleeps, but Joseph Barrett wanted to sneak in a women's basketball question, which I know you are happy to have an answer to this. Eric, will Liatu King play against USC on Saturday?
I have no idea. I'm guessing no. And it's a guess. We had somebody covering the game for us remotely. They had a Zoom and they cut the Zoom off before they would let Bill Belinsky ask a question. Nobody that was in person thought to ask about Liatu King and her absence from the game. She took a spill in the previous game and reported some dizziness. And they go, "Well, we'll know the status tomorrow." Well, guess what? They decided not to share it with the world. The injuries with the Notre Dame women's basketball team are comically national secrets, and that's all I can say. But given the fact that she didn't play at all against Lafayette on Sunday, I wouldn't be optimistic that she'll play on Saturday. Now, Niele has some media availability on Wednesday. If we get some sort of indication, whether she winks or whatever, or does it telepathically, or tips her hand in some other way, we will pass it along to you, Joseph. I promise.
Yeah, there's only
not a silly question.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question, and it's one we can only spend a certain amount of time and energy on in the middle of football season where Notre Dame's making a college football playoff run. But this is a nationally prominent women's basketball program that has a recent not great history with injuries, and so there are plenty of injury questions that can be asked of players, but the timelines are very vague. And to be fair, like Notre Dame's football program does provide updates, although they might not always be accurate or be truly indicative of what is going to happen. But there at least is some sort of protocol in place there, which doesn't necessarily seem to be the case with the women's basketball program, where that information is guarded closely. Like maybe people didn't ask because they didn't think they'd get an answer, and so they figured they would spend their questions elsewhere after the game. So we'll see what information we can get on that. But Notre Dame will need at as many players available as it can have to play a very good USC team. And that's an exciting game that unfortunately may be lost a little bit in the spotlight of a college football Saturday.
1 o'clock on NBC.
All right, that'll do it for us tonight. As you should know by now, it's always a good time to be a subscriber to InsideNDSports.com. So give us a try with a 30-day free trial. That's exclusive to our YouTube audience using promo code NDYT. Make sure you're subscribed to us here on our YouTube channel, which is free. We appreciate everyone chiming in tonight, asking questions. Our YouTube schedule for the week will be our Inside ND Sports podcast. Comes out on Thursday. Place your bets on Friday. Eric, is Bob Morton lined up for Into the End Zone on Saturday?
Right after the game.
Right after the game, you'll have Eric and Bob Morton live discussing the outcome of Notre Dame Army, and then Eric and I will share our post-game takeaways early Sunday morning after I've made my public transportation back to my hotel in New York City. And as always, check out our content on InsideNDSports.com, and hope you all have a great week.